The following podcast is an Embassy Row production.
Hey everybody, I'm Marc Lamont Hill, owner of Uncle Bobby's Coffee and Books. I am a professor, a scholar, and most importantly, a book nerd. I say book nerd because I don't just love to read books, I'm the person who loves to read about the book. I love hearing authors talk about how and why they wrote the book, and I love talking to other book nerds about their favorite books. That's why I started Coffee and Books. It's a podcast all about books. Every episode, I sit down over a cup of coffee with the world's biggest authors to discuss the most interesting, controversial, fun, and important books. And sometimes I hang out with experts, fans, and other special guests to talk about the greatest books of all time. And today is an extra special episode. We have with us New York Times best-selling author, Vanderbilt University professor, my mentor, my friend, Eric Dyson. He's the author of a wonderful new book. It's called Long Time Coming, Reckoning with Race in America. Mike, it's good to see you, man.
Brother Marc Lamont Hill, what's going on, Doc?
Man, I am good. I just finished reading your book this morning, and I got to say, man, it's one of your finest. But just so you know, here at Coffee and Books, before we talk about the books, we do talk about coffee. I happen to be drinking a cup of black coffee. Nothing in it. I go straight black coffee so that I can keep my mind focused. You're a writer and a reader. Do you do coffee?
I do not do coffee, man. I mean, that's amazing. Because look, I'm hyped enough as it is. Can you imagine turn drugs? Look, I'm allergic to drugs, so I can't take them. And I'm not allergic to coffee, but I've never kind of needed it. I just get up like wired.
And you just lock in.
I just lock in, bro. Now if I got to stay up late at night, and I've started not doing this because a little caffeine in me will go. I'm old, so that stuff will last forever. So if I used to look, they used to say back in the country, Coca-Cola, little Coca-Cola. I don't want Negroes to say I was drinking Coke, but a little Coca-Cola will last me a little bit. But yeah, I don't do it now. Every now and again, I'll do some hot chocolate. But not too much. So I'm not a coffee connoisseur, man.
No, that's not a problem. You know, almost everybody on here has been a coffee drinker or a tea drinker. But hot chocolate is an interesting one. For y'all that don't know, by the way, Uncle Bobby's, we have a special drink. It's a banana hot chocolate. So you just put a little bit of pure cacao in there, a little bit of banana syrup in your hot chocolate, steam some milk. It'll get you through the night. Now, I happen to put a little Bailey's in mine because I'm a backslider, unlike Reverend Dyson. But
that's hilarious.
You can do it any way you want.
Now, I'll do chamomile tea from time to time. I like chamomile tea.
See, that's a good move too, man. Whatever it takes. Now, talk to me about this book, man. I like I said, I read it today. I finished reading it today. I've been reading it all week, and it's a special book. I want to say that it's an absolutely special book. I've read all of your work, every single book, and this one I think is in the upper echelon for a couple of reasons for me. But talk to me about what you were trying to do with the book. What your goal was.
After and thank you for that very kindly, my brother, because you are a superb critic and a great reader of books. And that's a lost art. Now, I know people think, well, ain't you a scholar? Ain't that redundant? No, it really ain't. I can't tell you how many scholars I've met that don't be reading. They be criticized. I was like, well, how you be criticizing something and you really ain't even read it? And one person, and I'm gonna get to your answer, but one person said, I never will forget, I was sitting somewhere, it was at a political gathering. It was after some presidential debate. And we're sitting in the area where we're going to talk for each individual candidates and stuff. And this woman, well-known, if I called her name, you'd know, and I respect her a great deal. And she says, I got your Cosby book.
Right.
I looked at the cover and I was like, not really. She said, but then I read it. And oh my God, it was so brilliant and scholarly. And I said, are you literally telling me as a scholar, you judge the book by its cover? Like, please, that is such a cliche for those who are unenlightened, but you did that. So
wow.
I take those words from you quite seriously. So what I wanted to do with this book is to reach out to my fellow citizens, especially Black folk in America, but also talk to some white folk, others in between. I mean, it's not, when BIPOC, I'm talking about Black folk, I'm talking about indigenous people, I'm talking about people of color across the board, right? But I really specifically want to talk to Black folk and write these letters to these martyrs, because I wanted to say to America, I got some intellectual analysis in here. I hope I do a hell of an engagement with some ideas that are critical. I try to make some, serious contributions on the scholarly tip, but I want it to be an accessible language that people can understand and that is poetic enough to lure the ear, to capture the heart, and then seize the eye and force people to see what they've averted their eyes from in the past. So I wanted to talk about some horrendous stuff, some traumatic stuff. And I didn't want to merely repeat the trauma. I wanted to filter it through my own perspective and see it in a way to refract it through the prism of my lived experience and my analysis of Black death, Black suffering, and Black trauma in the history of this nation.
One of the ways you do that at the level of form is through the letter.
Mm-hmm.
You made a decision to write to some of the martyrs.
Right.
You could have written about Emmett Till or Eric Garner, but you made a decision to write to them. You could have written about Breonna Taylor or Elijah McClain, but you wrote to them rather than about them. Why? Why that form?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because I wanted to commune with the dead, right? Not a seance, so to speak, but a collective engagement with the tribunal of ancestors who have been forced into glory as a result of the infamy of their deaths. And I wanted to speak to them. I wanted to talk to them, right? I wanted to, I didn't want to do it in a hokey fashion, like, how are you doing? And so on and so forth. And what life must be like on the other side. I didn't want to get into that kind of postmodern Dionne Warwick. And I got mad love and respect for Miss Warwick. I'm not saying it like that. Or kind of ghost aesthetic with Whoopi Goldberg talking to Patrick Swayze. But I wanted to speak to the ancestors in a vibrant and vital fashion, to reflect with them, to think out loud with them, to imagine what it might be to be them. And, so I'm wondering about Emmett Till. We don't even know what your voice sounds like. You've spoken to us through the ages, but we literally don't know what your voice sounds like. And the peculiar intimacies of our existence that are eradicated when sudden and tragic death descends. Right? It wipes out opportunity. Now, death wipes out the future for everybody, but Sean Connery dying from heart failure and old age at 90 is different than Emmett Till dying at 14 with a horrendous death, with a 70-pound cotton gin fan tied around his neck, tossed into the Tallahatchie River. So I wanted to commune with him because their deaths have been so productive in Black life, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful fashion. Those deaths have had an afterlife. They have continued to impact us and affect us. Their deaths changed our living. And in the strict sense of martyrdom, one that is chosen, Martin Luther King Jr., but the rest of these folk, arguably Reverend Clemente Pinckney, who I write to, chose it, but not even when you choose to preach the gospel. Yes, you choose to go die with Jesus, but you don't often think that's literal. You think it's a metaphorical or symbolic death. So none of the people I think who I write to, Breonna Taylor or Sandra Bland or Hadia Pendleton, Emmett Till, and the like, had designed their existence so that their potential surrender of life would be redemptive for Black people. They ain't had that on their minds. They weren't thinking about that. So I wanted to commune with them in the suddenness of their departure and in the incredible, dispiriting way of their disappearance to say, we remember you. So I wanted to remember them and to recall them and to cite their names and to write to them in an epistolary form that was a token of intimacy. I know other books, say Ta-Nehisi or Imani, have brilliantly written letters to the living, but I wanted to speak to those who had passed on, to say there's something about communing with you, meditating with you, talking to you, deriving some benefit from hearing your insight and wisdom, or just what we might say in light of thinking about you. One of the ways our ancestors speak to us is not directly, unless we think we have a medium that can communicate from the dead, but it's forcing us to think differently about existence as a result of theirs. And so that's a communication from an ancestral plane that I wanted to really tap into and to share with my readers.
You said something really beautiful here. You were talking to Emmett Till, but you were talking about Ahmaud Arbery, which for me, honestly, as you described the Ahmaud Arbery thing, it actually made me emotional to as you kind of helped us conjure or remember that death sequence. It was such a painful one, and you did it in such vivid and beautiful and, of course, painful detail. You said death by natural causes becomes a luxury, a fantasy of escape from a culture addicted to our death as fetish, as titillation. But then you went on with Ahmaud Arbery to say, about Ahmaud Arbery, you're talking to Emmett Till, you said, can't you see that the notion that he didn't belong there, that his black body was out of place and therefore out of options and then finally out of luck is just one of so many troubling things? It makes us feel the anatomy of our nothingness, our bodies squeezed into formlessness and invisibility beneath the pressure of a whiteness that wills our inexorable non-being. Can you imagine what we feel when we see this man being hunted like an animal, when we see him literally running for his life? That he was suspected of being a thug because he looked at an unfinished home shows how things that white folk take for granted get black lives taken. It is just fine for white folk to take a peek, but black curiosity is criminal. You're doing a few things there. You're sort of recounting the details, but you're making a really sophisticated philosophical argument that I think is in conversation with Afro-pessimists, that I think is in conversation with people who, for many, long before the Afro-pessimist movement, have thought about blackness as an identity, but also as a state of being, as an ontological condition. Mm-hmm. But you're also making a political argument about how vulnerable black bodies are in everyday life. You're doing all that in like 4 sentences. Talk to me about how you managed to do that, but also sort of what kind of political and intellectual work you're trying to do with this kind of moment there, which for me is exquisite writing as well.
Thank you, man. I appreciate the close reading, brother, because I ain't gonna get it nowhere else. So look, and I appreciate that so much. You know, I wanted to do that. I wanted to tap into the cross currents of an Afro-pessimism that is not explicitly nihilistic, but it denies the basis of hope rooted in an empirical engagement with time, circumstance, and structure. So I wanted to argue, I wanted to acknowledge the legitimacy of that gesture and reflex. I wanted to acknowledge that in the midst of the chaos and calamity, the cataclysm of Black existence erupts in spaces, ruptures ideals and settled conceptions, and exposes us to a metastasized Blackness that goes across the body of our experience. And I wanted to acknowledge that. And at the same time, I wanted people to feel the kind of metaphysical dread that we encounter. You know, when you use the word ontology, when we think of Heidegger, we think of Paul Tillich, the theologian, of course, we think of even Sartre, and we think of Fanon. And so I wanted that sense of dread, that sense of limit, that sense of non-being, that sense of being pummeled into nothingness, no thing there, so that there is no ex post facto, no ipso facto, no a priori, no ex posteriority, because there's nothingness from beginning to end. Out of nothing we come, into nothing we go, and in the middle, supposedly, in this brief stretch and span of life, exists something, but our something is reduced to nothing by will of whiteness. And I wanted us to feel that. I wanted us to feel the philosophical offense, not just the physical one. I wanted us to feel the metaphysical outlaw that Ahmaud Arbery was turned into, and also to feel the unsettling character of white supremacy in the sense that it unmakes us, it undoes us, it unhinges us to the joints of reality. And no longer can that door swing open. And I wanted to talk about how it got closed. Then I wanted to talk about the politics of it, even the social situation where Black curiosity is outlawed, Black curiosity is criminalized, and Black curiosity is made fatal. And then they wonder why, and they ask why Black folk ain't curious about a certain reality. It's not that Black folk ain't curious. Black folk have had their curiosity directed and redirected, because being curious about certain things, curiosity killed the cat. Well, for Black people, you know, that's why always we have this cliche among ourselves, White folks stop and ask, gee, Jiminy Cricket, what happened there? Negroes see something, we gone. Ain't asking no questions. We ain't trying to get into no deep philosophical, phenomenological analysis. We trying to get up out of there, right? So that's a survival mechanism. So don't reduce the complexity and nuance of our Black survival habit to a judgment about our intellectual capacity or our willful rejection of curiosity. Curiosity has murdered us. And I wanted to talk about the social consequences of that curiosity and then the political consequences of Black bodies and white spaces and what that might mean in a world where, rather simply, Black folk getting caught at the wrong time, at the wrong place, on the wrong street, are found in the wrong body, that is, anything breathing, and are sent as quickly as possible, dispatched into the next world by any means necessary. And so I wanted to capture all of that at the same time, and thank you for reading the complicated convergence of all those nuances.
In your conversation with Hadia Pendleton, which I think is also an important move you make, because it's easier to talk about these Black martyrs who are most celebrated. Everyone sort of knows Eric Garner. Everyone sort of knows everyone knows George Floyd at this point. Breonna Taylor became a household name, even if it's through the kind of unfortunate memification of her at some point. We got to know who she was. But you're also drawing Hadia Pendleton out, which I think is important to not just kind of respond to the public memory, but to stoke it, which is what I think what you're doing with Hadia. But in that chapter, you also get to cancel culture. And you're a cultural critic, and you have watched from your first book 26 years ago until now some interesting shifts in public culture, in the public discourse, even what constitutes the public sphere, right? We're doing this conversation over Zoom.
Right.
And we might be on Twitter later.
Right.
What is cancel culture for you, and why is it so complex but problematic in a certain way for you?
Right. Well, I'm glad you teed that up, because I specifically wrote that in the Hadia Pendleton chapter, because as you indicate, she didn't fit the flow of the other martyrs, because she's killed by a young Black man who mistook her for a gang member, as if that was justification, of course, to take her out, but mistook her for a gang member, shot her in the back, a cowardly gesture to be certain, and then his partner drove the getaway car, and they're both serving life in prison right now, and her life is taken. And I wanted to acknowledge her martyrdom. I wanted to acknowledge her surrender of life. I wanted to acknowledge the grievous manner in which her death catalyzed an ambition, on the one hand, to take measure of the loss of Black life at the hands of Black life, and on the other hand, for some people to draw kind of moral lessons from that have had ruinous political consequence. So I've tried to argue with the Black on Black nomenclature, because people kill where they live. We know this, right? And if we look at previous incarnations of the ghetto, whether they're Jewish or Polish or Italian, people kill where they're clammed up together and where they're forced to live together. When we look at, the ways in which political economies of desire within Black and brown and red indigenous communities and in white ethnic communities that are poor, right? The avarice is not for, stuff I want and can't have, and I'm looking at it because I'm greedy. The very means of existence are at stake. Yes. So what they're envious of is what other people can take for granted. And so, I wanted to hint at that, allude to that, without being able to deconstruct it, because I've written about that in other books. So I wanted to argue with the Black on Black language, but I think this is what the left does often that misses out on why it's traumatizing to so many of our communities. Just because we rightly, and I say rightly, have made a distinction between so-called Black on Black murder and neighbor to neighbor carnage, which is what it is, which is race neutral at that point, it does have racial consequence when a Black person kills another Black person, right? So we're not getting rid of that issue. We're not somehow dismissing the fact that, even though people kill where they live, It is the fact that we live in a white supremacist culture. And if Black people watch more television and consume more pop culture than anybody, and that pop culture is shot through with all sorts of hateful sentiments toward Black people, we're internalizing that, drinking it in. There is a dimension of self-hatred when we can look at another Black person and not see love and respect, but see disdain and a kind of futile exhaustion with Blackness. And I want to acknowledge that. I mean, we got to say that at the same time. And on top of that, though, because we're living in such tenuous circumstances and such dangerous circumstances being Black in America, no matter what your strata is, whether you're making a bunch of money or none, I wanted to turn to cancel culture because I wanted it in the rhythm of the book, because the argument of the book is we're questing for justice. Long time coming. We've been reckoning with this. And I talk about enslavement. I talk about Jim Crow. I talk about the Confederacy. And I want to talk about what's going on now. And I'm saying cancel culture ain't it. I get it, because the courts have denied us legitimate access to I think, justice in many ways. We said we're going to do it ourselves then. And when we started, I think Margaret Atwood and other writers have talked about this in a brilliant fashion. The moment we started adjudicating moral, political, and social issues on the internet, we are lost. We're done. It can't happen. It's not nuanced. It's not sophisticated. I'm not saying some of the issues, right? Look, we couldn't get R. Kelly into court, boom. So we get him in cancel culture. Same with Bill Cosby, boom. Same with Harvey Weinstein, boom. All right, and it looks like, okay, it's working. What you mad at? What I'm mad at is most of that stuff, though, ain't spent on getting the Harvey Weinsteins and the R. Kellys and the Bill Cosbys. It's on each other. I've seen it. And it's parallel, it's peer, and it's hateful, it's full of vitriol. And I can understand, and you and I have had a million conversations about this offline, about the degree to which cancel culture, to me, which is the quest for a just outcome to a complex situation and delivering swift and decisive judgment that ultimately, for me, is not fair. It ain't got no counter evidence. It ain't got no counter claims, except what you can, if you can sometimes get on the internet and say, defend yourself. Well, no, it was much more complicated than that. No, it wasn't. And then you got 1,000 people riding down on you. I knew him when. He ain't shit. He didn't do. And then before you know it, there is no adjudication, by which we mean presenting of evidence in the face of claims about either justice or offense, and allowing a narrative to develop that would put forth facts that would countermand the evidence that has been marshaled in your disfavor. Ain't none of that going on. Ain't nobody hearing nothing except what they want to hear. And the person with the loudest microphone and the megaphone on the internet is going to be the one ultimately that wins the battle. And to me, that's so destructive. And I argue in the book that at one level, especially for Black folks, since Black Twitter, is a thing. I know Jay-Z blew somebody's mind like, Jack, you ain't getting the check when Jack getting the check. So it can be a metaphysical assertion, but Negro, you ain't getting the paper. So Black Twitter is an honorific. It's an honorary degree. You can call yourself doctor, but you ain't really done the work to do it. So no disrespect, no shade thrown at anybody except everybody who does it. So what I'm saying is, sorry. So the thing is, to me, certain moments of cancel culture are white supremacy by proxy. White supremacy is the thing that wants to cancel, eviscerate, destroy, extirpate, wipe people out, kill you. Whereas from the tradition I come from, it ain't the only one in Black America. I admit that, I acknowledge that. But the one I'm from, the religious tradition, is about, yes, holding people accountable, yes, spitting judgment against things you find offensive, but also having a balanced perspective. Maybe you can't, dispose of people as you so brilliantly speak about. Maybe you can't just get rid of folk. Maybe you acknowledge they did something wrong, deal with the consequences of what that wrong are, and then come forth and still be a productive member of society. And it's interesting to me, some of the same people who practice cancel culture say they against jails and
the abolitionists. Yeah.
Would you abolish that crap too? All right.
Right.
So that kind of juxtaposition is what I was after there. And I just want to present that to people like, hey, we can be about justice, but this is a second, third tier, fourth tier kind of justice that ultimately won't do us well.
How does Kobe Bryant play into the attempt to reckon with race in the United States?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it's complicated, as you know. Kobe Bryant, one of the greatest ball players ever. You know, I think, Kobe, Jordan, LeBron, you just gonna argue, you're splitting hairs for different reasons. So for me, one of the greatest ball players ever to live, one of the most significant contributions to the culture of style and aesthetic, the beauty of his jump shot, the incredible art of his footwork, the power to transform an aesthetic derived from a non-Black sport, soccer, though it's being Blackenized in a certain way, blackened, if you will, but taking that European vocabulary and then transposing that onto essentially an African-American male sport. Didn't start that way, but that's what it's become. And some European dudes, some white Europeans, right? So that's their game right now. So when you look at that, just what he did in terms of the art and the manifestation of aesthetics within Black sport, amazing. Also, what he did culturally is important. Of course, the charge of rape that he encountered when he was, 24 years old, very young. When you look back and think about it, you think, well, Kobe Bryant, because the woman that he was accused of raping was, 19 years old. So then he looks by contrast, 5 years older. And at that period, when you're between 19 and 25, it looks like a big leap there. But when you look back on it, my God, they're both very young people. He was accused of rape. As you know, they had long preliminaries. It never finally made it to court in the sense of having a trial. They settled out of court. Kobe did not admit guilt, but he apologized to the young lady because she clearly saw it differently than he did. Fast forward, to the time when he dies in a helicopter crash with 8 other people, including his beloved daughter, Gigi, and people are mourning and weeping, rightfully so, over his death, you and I included. But then there was some pushback because some people had concluded that Kobe was, because he was accused of being a rapist, that he is therefore a rapist without having that issue adjudicated the way we're speaking about. And I'm not saying that every adjudication will be fair. I mean, the killers of many civil rights leaders went free, and we know who they were, right? We know who killed Medgar Evers. The dude went around bragging about it. But ultimately, finally, Doug Jones became a senator out of Alabama and in Mississippi, opening up old civil rights cases and then having a sense of justice, right? Not cancel culture, in the court system, the very one that was a kangaroo court when it came to Emmett Till or with many of our Black civil rights leaders and martyrs, but finally delivered justice. So I say all that to say, Kobe then, was seen as a rapist by many. I think Evan Rachel Wood, the actress, white actress, said, Kobe was a great basketball player and a good guy, and he's a rapist. And those two things can come together. People were pissed. Gayle King had an interview with Lisa Leslie, a friend of Kobe's and a great basketball star in her own right, one of the immortals, a legend, and asking her about Kobe's rape charge. And people thought it was too soon and he's just dead. And how are you asking this? And so I try to deal with that in the book. And I acknowledge, look, as a journalist, she has a responsibility and an obligation to ask certain kinds of questions because they do go to his legacy. And we're talking about his legacy and we're talking about after his death. At the same time, to not understand the point that Black America en large was making, en masse was making, is that, hey, he was accused, but he was never he was in charge. He was never convicted of rape. There was no finding of him as a rapist. So whatever your conclusion is, that's not a legal, technical, or substantiated claim that you can have evidence to back up. So cancel culture, Kobe Bryant, Gayle King, and each side trying to cancel each other. Mad at Gayle King for asking the question, the cancel culture lover, me too. Yes, ask that question, but then they want to cancel her out because look at the criteria that you use in order to substantiate what you're doing. So for me, I just think, again, the cancel culture and understandably deals with two issues that we can't resolve, race and sex. The reason cancel culture has risen about those two features is because the courts can't resolve them, the culture can't resolve them. Long traditions of thought and reflection can't resolve them. So we think with the invention of the internet, we can solve that right here. Oh, we got it for you, dog. You've been worrying about what that is? We got the answer. You're done. You're finished. And I think in the case of Kobe Bryant, he says a lot about race. Black man, white woman, that was at stake. Younger woman, a little older man, that was at stake. And what was ultimately at stake is men with money and means get away with stuff. But the flip side of it is it took Kobe all that money, all that fame, just to go up against the word of a white woman, right? And some of the Black feminists who understandably were outraged by some of the reflexive covering of Kobe don't have much self-critical analysis about Becky that they find scornful on other arenas, but may not be as quick to refer to Becky in that moment because they're joined, understandably so, by the grief of racial offense. So there's a lot of stuff going on there at the same time. And Kobe is an avatar for so much of that stuff.
You've been a writer about race in America for decades now. You've written dozens of books, almost all of which deal with this question of race head on, all deal with the question of race, many of them head on as the primary unit of analysis or subject of analysis. What has changed about writing on race over the time that you've been writing?
You know, the older you get, you hope to get wiser. You hope to get clearer. And the closer you get to your grave and the closer you get to your sense of mortality, it winnows out the inessential. And you just want to focus on what is to you clear and legitimate and worthy of investment. Because so much of stuff we do, we get upset about. And again, this is why I think cancel culture has to go the way of the dodo. Because ultimately, life is too complicated and too complex to have such swift and easy dismissal of nuance and of the character of assessment and interpretation that we need to bring to bear. And so the older I've gotten, the more, I don't know if race has changed or I changed about race, right? And what has changed in me is the real desire to want to see the possibility that we can have a good outcome to some horrible things. And the older I get, do I want to be more forgiving? Yeah, I want to be more forgiving in this sense. I remember picking up one of the greatest preachers in the history of Christendom, certainly of American Christianity, and Black preaching. And to me, Black preaching and great preaching is redundant when we talk about American preaching, because the average Negro with 10 people in the church will outpreach Joel Osteen and all these other people. I'm just telling Paula White, too. Although Paula White got Black style, she just ain't got no Black conscience. So,
right.
Right. And she's pastoring all those Black people in, was it Florida? Yeah. Ain't got nothing to say to them or Joel Osteen, but that's another pet peeve. So I'm picking up William Augustus Jones, one of the greatest preachers ever. He and Gardner Taylor, right? And he, were seen as among, with Frederick George Sampson, my pastor, Jeremiah Wright, James Forbes, Carolyn Knight, Prathia Hall Wynn, the 15 greatest Black preachers. My pastor was on that list twice. Gardner Taylor was on there, and so was William Augustus Jones. And William Augustus Jones, all of these men now since gone to heaven to their reward, he was like Carlisle Marney, the Southern preacher. They said about him, he had a voice like God, only deeper. And Jones had that deep voice and tremendous poetry. I mean, I hate to be one of these dudes like it ain't like it used to be, but I'm just telling you, it ain't like it used to be. They wasn't concerned about making no money and the gospel of prosperity. I mean, William Augustus Jones, right, preaching this sermon, Simon, Simon, I have prayed for thee. That Kentucky sound coming through despite he's up in Brooklyn. I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not. Satan has desired to sift you like wheat, but when thou art converted, then strengthen thy brethren. And this Negro got up and preached a low way up. I was like, man. And he's talking about going up, but the low way, the hurt and the pain and the agony. He said, when you get up there real close to God, where you can smell the heavenly incense burning on the altar, watch out. I mean, he said, and then with the crisis swelling to bewildering proportions, with the shepherd about to be slain and the sheep about to be scattered, with Gethsemane beckoning and Calvary calling. I mean, the richness, the profundity, the poetry, as well as the substance. And talking about race, he wrote a book called God in the Ghetto. That was his D-Min, Doctor of Ministry dissertation turned into a book. So here's a guy, brilliant. And so I'm picking him up. I'm a young preacher, 21 years old. I'm excited. Oh my God, I'm picking up William Augustus Jones. I was the assistant minister of a church in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I knock on his hotel room there, and he's still getting finished up. He's packing. He said, come on in, young man. And he's packing. He says, you know, it's easier as a young preacher to damn the heat pile and to damn people to their own hell than it is to join with them to make things better. He said, it's the temptation of a younger preacher to send them to hell. He said, but the older I get, the more I preach about grace. Then he paused. He said, maybe because I need more of it. Woo! I mean, because I need more of it. And the older I get and the more grace I need and the more understanding that we all need, that we understand. Younger, you're quick to the draw, you're able to dissect, although I've tried always to be fair and to be just. I think that's a hallmark of my work to a certain degree, that I'm trying to at least look at a balanced perspective. If I'm looking at hip hop, I'm gonna talk about the great stuff, but also some of the nefarious stuff. So Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, same way. I'm just trying to be balanced. Even with Bill Cosby, I acknowledge his genius and what his contributions have been before or along with trying to get into some of the stuff that is so nasty and foul and funky, especially on the level of hypocrisy he was operating on. But now that I'm older, I think that, look, we have the chance and possibility of making this thing better. We're dealing with white supremacy and its unmitigated, almost unmasked expression with a guy like a Donald Trump and the people he's emboldened. That's as clear and that's as reduced to a unit of interpretation as you can imagine that you would want. There it is right there before your face. You know, it has complex iterations, but at the end of the day, the stuff is real simple. And it demands something parallel from us, is to reduce that to something clear and powerful. And as you and I have talked about, Jesse Jackson saying to me, if you say something I can't understand, that's a failure of your education, not mine. And so to try to get it plainer. Now, me at this level, at this age, 62 years, I'm free. I have fun with language. I don't mind people going, well, we can't understand what you're saying. Read a book then. Get a dictionary, homie. Now, first of all, that's a trope. And that's a meme. And the stuff I be saying, you be understand what I'm saying. And
just so my audience knows what you're talking about. You know, sometimes you receive criticism saying that you used a lot of quote unquote big words. Right. And I remember there was a hashtag, maybe 5-10 years ago, Dyson dissertation titles, and people were coming up with these kind of mix of like big words and pop culture references and stuff. You took it in good fun, but how do you respond? Not only how do you respond to it, but how do you see the responsibility of both the writer in terms of making work that's accessible, but as you're starting to talk about, the reader, what's the reader's responsibility in this too?
Oh yeah, that's a great point. See, people never bring up what you just said there, bruh. They bring up the role and responsibility of the writer, and that's big, and that's huge, and it's probably primary. But I ain't gonna never see the legitimacy of interpretation to a writer. I bring something to it. I'm a reader. I'm gonna engage. If that's the case, the Bible would have been dead letters for us. The Quran could have been written and read in a certain narrow way. The pericope, the passage of scripture, the exegesis, the interpretation of a particular passage of scripture. The eisegesis, let me read into it. I'm just going to interpret it based upon my own subjective condition. The Sitz im Leben, what does that mean? The German phrase, the situation in which the text breathes. You can't leave that stuff to no professionals. Although we need some real sophisticated people. Well, in the Greek it said this, and in the, in German it said this, and in blah, blah, blah. We need all that. I ain't saying we don't need that. But you got to bring the full weight of your experience in an existential reading, a personal being deep, ontological, big old word that talks about being. You got to bring that into your reading. So for me, when people say that, first of all, I always ask them when they say it on Twitter, I said, give me an example. And they can't never have one. What, important? That's 3 syllables, important. Okay, you talking about that? You talking about important? You talking about receptacle? Was that 4? Like, come on, bruh. Like, stop with that. Now, we can be deliberately obscurantists, and sometimes I choose to be, especially when I like to cuss somebody out. And instead of cussing you out, I'm going to make you mad by saying some words you don't understand to rile you up to have the same effect as if I called you a mother or a son of a, right? So that's a political choice, though. And that's usually not against Black people. That's usually not against people without means. That's against those who are the elite, who are trying to use the full weight and panoply of their gifts to hurt and harm Black people. Then I'm trying to punish you. I'm trying to push you. I'm trying to elbow you. I'm in the paint going at you like Moses Malone or like Shaq. I'm breaking backboards rhetorically. I'm trying to split the glass on your body because this is a warfare going on here and I'm defending those people. Now, I remember Jesse Jackson again told me this story that Martin Luther King Jr. was out somewhere and they was preaching. And the Black folk were there and the white folk, and then King is talking about, I believe in God because God is love. Yeah, yeah. I believe in God because God is truth. Yes, yes. I believe in God because God is the ontological assertion of an ultimate contestation against negative nihilism. And then somebody said to Black people, you don't understand what King's saying? He said, yeah, but neither do the white people. Neither do the white people. And here, look at the deconstructive practice. Look at the demystification in a Bultmannian mythology. Rudolf Bultmann, the great mythologizer, demythologizing the Bible, saying it's a bunch of myths. Let's look at it beyond the myths. Look at how ordinary Black people are demythologizing because they don't believe white folk understand it. A lot of people go, well, the white people understand it. It's just Negroes who don't. No, the white folk don't understand it. They are challenging white supremacy with their interpretation. And so my point, and exactly right. So I believe in playfulness of words. I believe in multiple genres of expression. I believe respecting the genre. If it's poetry, make it poetry. If it's history, make it history. If it's analysis, make it analysis. If it's literary, make it literary. So there are different ways and means of expression. And I feel the full possibility in myself. I want to play with as many genres as possible. Sermons, poems, Def Poetry Jam. I've done all this stuff. Public speaking, lectures, interviews. I don't care. I want to master all of it. I ain't no this in nonfiction. I ain't no fiction writer, but all the other stuff that's out here in the nonfiction genre, I'm just trying to master that. I'm trying to get involved with it. I'm trying to play with it. I think it's important for us to understand the beauty, the power of words and their ability to make and unmake, to reveal and conceal, to obscure and also to make plain. And at this level in my life, I want to be able to do that, which is why I think we got to forgive people enough to give them a humanity that has been denied to them so that they can respond. When you push a man or woman against the wall and they ain't got nowhere to go, the only way out is through your ass. So you're forcing negativity upon them. Give them room to breathe, to collect themselves, to acknowledge that they're embarrassed. Find a way to reconstitute their own decimated, fragile ego enough that they can respond in humanity, not hate and not resentment and not nastiness. And so the older I get, the more value in that I see. Even as I fight hard against white supremacy, I ain't trying to make nice with people who lost in this election. Let's reach out to the other side. That's balderdash because that ain't real reaching out. That's pandering. That's acknowledging that these people who did something fundamentally wrong now want to be congratulated for it and rewarded. I don't know nobody when Negroes lost 4 years ago, reach out to the poor Black people who lost this election because they must feel horrible right now. I don't know about you, the bigger
I ain't get a call yet.
I ain't heard Nathan about that. So, but I mean real generous gestures of rapprochement, of reaching out, of trying to reestablish connections, suture gaping wounds with our care and love and compassion. Not by the way, only for white folk or others. I'm talking about especially among Black people, Black men and Black women, Black older people and Black children, and so-called straight people and those who ain't. Those are big, big gaping wounds in our community that have to be dealt with.
You've talked about what work you want your work to do in the world. Mm-hmm. What does writing do for you?
It's beautiful. It's cathartic. It's revealing. I don't know about you, but I often don't know what I think until I start writing. Like, oh, I didn't know I thought that. Well, damn. It's just as revealing to me as it is to others. Now, I got to go back and I got to revise, because the best writer is a rewriter. And revision is critical. Vision is important. Revision is more important. Getting elected for Obama in 2008 was important. Getting reelected said a lot more. They knew who he was, and still he was able to get them to vote for him the second time. So writing is 2008. Rewriting is 2012, right? The reelection of words to the Oval Office of your conscience. Excuse me for the ham-handed metaphor, but there it is. So it's beautiful to me. And the possibility of creating, because I've read such great writing in my life. You know, as a young person, reading Baldwin, and then a little bit older, reading Ellison and Morrison, but reading also Ralph Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. I mean, I love those American Renaissance writers. And that stuff, you know, and I got a gift of the Harvard Classics. And that stuff changed my life. I'm in the ghetto in Detroit in the hood, reading Robert Frost, reading Alfred Lord Tennyson. And it wasn't strange to me. My pastor, who was one of the greatest preachers in America, twice named 15 greatest Black preachers, used to quote poetry from the pulpit. I thought that was normal. So I was remembering poetry. And when I got that gift of the Harvard Classics as a brother in the hood, in the ghetto, that was life-changing to me. Reading all that vast, 5-foot bookshelf of learning, as Charles Eliot, then president of Harvard in the early turn of the century in the 1900s, called it. So that stuff was important. So I drank all that in. And now I want to be able to give back, baptized in my experience with my word choice, looking at Baldwin to see what grammar can do, what punctuation can do to speed up or slow down, to stop for a moment, to take a rest stop, right, at a particular phrase and then carry it forward, to understand what the beauty and power, the tonic meditation of literary attempts made on page can do for soulful reflection on who the self is. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to figure out. What is the relationship of this self, this consciousness, this ego to the world surrounding me? How do I relate to it? That's a philosophical question. People have spent reams of ink, and from Aristotle down. Alfred North Whitehead said that, that Western philosophy is a footnote to Aristotle, Plato. So the reality is that we spend a lot of time trying to figure that out, but writing is an avenue into the adventure of self-awareness. And it's a way of shaping narratives that shape events that are shaped by narrative. Because sometimes, in the beginning was the word. Wow. So the word is a vital, viable, creative principle. I've always understood that, whether nomos or logos, whether it's an Afrocentric or European conception of what the word is, that word lives and breathes. And for me, when I sit down to write, not knowing what I think, channeling what I think are ideas that emerge from me, but that have been put together because of past efforts of critical and creative intervention, it's a beautiful thing. And I have a wonderful, powerful opportunity to try to figure out what I'm saying, what the world should mean, and also the sheer beauty, the near physical effect of aesthetic enjoyment is so ineffably powerful that it's hard to explain. I mean, I remember reading, and I'll get it wrong, C.S. Lewis, the great Christian writer, an evangelical, with far more sense than a lot of evangelicals have. But C.S. Lewis was telling the story about this kid and chocolate and trying to explain to a kid, what chocolate was like, right? Or should I say he was trying to explain what sex was like, was wondering what sex was like. And so the most beautiful and joyful experience this kid had was chocolate. So he's trying to figure out, is there a metaphoric and relationship between chocolate and sex? Now, there are many ways we can answer that, but we'll both refrain at this particular moment. So the point is that writing puts you in an arena when the highest joy you've ever known has the potential to be eclipsed by ones that come to you in the creative process. And I think there's little that is as powerful and as revealing as that moment. And it's a matter of discipline. I mean, we can wax poetic about it, but it's about sitting your butt in that seat and sitting down and staring at that screen. And I don't know about you, but I argue with it like, oh my God. And it's almost a dread feeling like, oh my, I can start. And then when I get started, finally the rhythm comes, because writing is rhythm.
Yeah.
I get into the rhythm, and then at certain points, I'm nervous. Like, I don't know, can I get it out? Can I work it? And I go back and forth. It is a delirious ecstasy. It is a sublime punishment in a certain way. And it's beautiful to be able to have that gift to tell the story, as old Black preachers say, but to look at new avenues in which to tell that story, and to look at words as not only vehicles of revelation and enlightenment, but as, in the best sense of the word, weapons, and in the worst sense of the word, weapons. And you got to figure out how to use them to the benefit of the people you love and the societies in which you exist.
You talked about the idea of sort of unexplored avenues.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a genre of writing or an approach that you've taken? You've already scratched fiction off the table. Is there a form or an approach that you have yet to take that you'd love to experiment with or try?
Yeah, that's a great point. I want to write some poetry. I mean, I've written some amateur stuff that I'm embarrassed about, but I read so much poetry. I read poets' own poetry, some of the greatest writing ever. Wyston Hugh Auden, one of my favorite, W.H. Auden, writing about, Posey or Alexander Pope. Or when you look at a Rita Dove, what she does with Thomas and Beulah. I mean, wow. The ability to do that, to have that gift of Elizabeth Alexander, a Thomas Sayers Ellis, and to really experiment with that form. And I love hip hop in a way, and I've read poetry for so long, but to really be able to even write a decent poem takes so much technical skill and so much awareness of the ability to control grammar and use it and direct it in certain ways. I would love to be able to write a decent poem one day.
Are you afraid?
Yeah, I mean, I am. I don't, because I've tried to do a lot of stuff well. I've been, I got everybody. You can have haters and you can have legitimate critics, right? You can learn from both. I've learned some stuff from haters, but mostly you're going to learn best from critics who can appreciate what you were aiming for, who acknowledge some of the good stuff you did and said, this is where you failed. Not vicious critics, not people who are trying to destroy you, but people who are trying to understand and defend a corpus of work, a body of belief, or an approach, a genre, a stylistic and aesthetic nomenclature to which greats have laid claim, and that you've got to raise your game in order to justify your participation. That I can understand. And you can learn some stuff from them. But I've been able to do quite well and be recognized across the board for a lot of that work. But it's like starting at the beginning. But that's the challenge that remains, right? You want to where do I have to go? Oh, let me go play baseball if I'm Michael Jordan and figure out that I got to start at the bottom and work my way up because I've mastered this other thing over here. I'm not claiming to have mastered anything like Jordan, but you've done well in other arenas. But it is scary at a certain level, but I might take that risk someday.
You've written a lot of books. I won't ask which one, but is there any project that after you wrote it, you said, I didn't do that well, or I wish I could do that differently?
Like every book you ever written.
I know that's right.
Every book you've ever written, you go damn, man, I wish I could have hit that better. I wish I could have done that differently. Hit my stride. That's what I meant by hit that better. Hit my stride better, or said it in a way that afterward. It's like the experience when you in a fight or something like that verbally, or somebody says something to you, and then 10 minutes later you thought, oh my God, if I had said that. Now, that's usually not your case because you're pretty quick. That's often not my case because I'm relatively quick.
But we all had them Nate Robinson moments.
Woo! I suspect the word Jake is not just for police. But they beat him like a cop. My God. Snoop Dogg was funny as all get out there. Oh my God.
Talk about multiple skill sets, man.
Oh my God. Dude.
Snoop got a whole new career now.
Get that dude a contract right now. But I think you look at it and you go you're satisfied because you had to let it go. At some level, you got to let it go. Because you and I both have friends, and we know people who for 40 years been working on the first book. It ain't the Ellison problem. I wrote a classic. It's because you're afraid you can't write a classic. You can't even write Invisible Man.
Right.
So you become an invisible man. Or woman, you got colleagues, I got colleagues, we got mentors, we people who are stultified by the enormity of the possibility of failure. And so at some level, I say to myself, I got to let it go. And now, just like Jay-Z trying to rank your albums or Nas ranking your albums, you could always rank them. But like you, y'all do the work yourself. I ain't doing the work for you now.
Right.
I wouldn't have put the book out if I ain't thought something was redemptive about it. Now I could be wrong later. and upon reflection, I was like, it ain't as good as I thought it was at those moments. But I think at the end of the day, any writer worth his or her salt probably feels that about every project. Every time I speak, every time I write, there are better ways I want to come at it. So next time I try to raise my game up. And that inspires you to the next time around, do it even better. Try to be sharper. Try to be more intelligent about the particular subject. Try to be clearer. And I think that keeps pushing us on.
Do you feel appreciated as a writer?
On some levels, yes. And on some levels, I figure I might be dead for 15 years, man, before they see what I done. Because in one way, you know, if you try to do a lot of stuff well in different genres, so you follow up a book about tears and race with a book about a meeting between James Baldwin and Robert Kennedy, then you follow that up with a book on Jay-Z, and then you follow that up with a book on epistolary form. My ambition, now I ain't hardly met the level of my ambition in terms of matching it with my talent, but I got ambition. And I know I want to write well in so many ways, and I know I want to keep striving to do it better. So I think that because you're on television or radio, or because you're in the popular sphere, people draw certain conclusions about you. You know this firsthand. And they miss a lot of the high intelligence, the highbrow engagement. Not that I'm trying to say that over against, you know, everyday ordinary discourse and speech, but it is important to talk about the level of ambition, matching that with talent, and knowing, you know, as I often say to myself, look, sometimes they ain't gonna have a chance to read it until you're gone, or enough cultural space to give themselves permission. It's not cool to read Michael Eric Dyson. It's not cool to like him right now. It's cool to talk about him in a certain way and to dismiss him, you know. Oh, but see, what I know, I'm doing the work. You know, the more you talk about me, the more I'm gonna stay on my knees, as the old song says. You can talk about me as much as you please. The more you talk about me, I'm gonna stay on my knees. Well, I'm gonna stay in my job. I'm gonna stay in my chair. I'm gonna keep writing because I want to get better. I want to get sharper. I never want to be satisfied. So in one sense, that lack of appreciation fuels me in a certain way.
Wow. So we've come to the point in the show where I do what is for my guests an excruciating experience, and what for me is extraordinary joy. The game is called Buy It, Borrow It, or Burn It.
Oh my God. I'm gonna be lying right now. I'm telling you.
I give no, it's easy. I give 3 books. One you can buy, one you borrow, one you gotta burn.
Oh my God.
But because you are the most decorated and accomplished author, instead of giving you 3 books that other people wrote, I'm gonna make you pick from your own corpus.
Oh my God. That is torture. That is horrible.
Exactly.
That's horrible.
And
That's
so
horrible.
I picked 3 of my favorites. So the first book is Reflecting Black.
Wow.
African-American Cultural Criticism. Your first book.
Right.
The other one, the second book is Holla If You Hear Me.
Oh my God.
Searching for Tupac Shakur.
Right.
And the third book is I May Not Get There With You.
Oh my God. I can't, dude.
The True Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh my God.
And so tell me which one you buy, which one you borrow, which one you burn, and tell me why. Because that's always the fun part too.
I'm gonna buy Holla If You Hear Me. I'm gonna borrow I May Not Get There With You. And I'll have to burn Reflecting Black. Now this is like Sophie's Choice. This is like which one of them kids you giving up? And that's hard to do. Because in the real world, I think those are 3 of the best books I've ever written. But the reason I would say ordinarily, because Martin Luther King Jr. is the greatest American who ever lived to me, period. End of story, conversation. I ain't got no ifs, ands, buts, asterisks, or nothing. However, I have not written the greatest book about Martin Luther King Jr. as hopefully as great as I May Not Get There With You is. Hopefully it's great, but who's gonna look at Taylor Branch's corpus? Who's gonna look at David Garrow, Lewis Baldwin? I mean, there's been enormous work. Now, what I did in that book was extremely important because I defended a radical interpretation of Martin Luther King Jr. in an extended fashion. And I unearthed some stuff that ain't a lot of people even dealt with to this day. And especially about the unsavory stuff. But when those tapes are released and the stuff comes out, they're going to remember in my book, dog, I said it right there. But I buried it in the footnotes.
Right, right.
And, and go back and read it. Oh, he did deal with this. Yeah. So that's why I could borrow that book. I could burn, although I don't want to, Reflecting Black, even though it was the blueprint, hopefully, for so much American Black cultural criticism that has built on that hopefully will redeem the investment in that work and therefore survive in ideas of others, even though that book is gone. The reason I would buy, Holly, if you hear me, is because I don't think that the interpretation of Tupac has been exceeded in that text. Not with what I bring together, the theology, the cultural criticism, the appreciation for his musical vocabulary, his voice, interviewing everybody from Robin Kelly to Toni Morrison, and bringing together a set of reflections on a seminal cultural figure who continues to resound and be relevant in our day and age. So if you force me, that's what I would do.
See, that was painful, but productive.
I told you I like that damn first Boogie Hill anyway. I told you, even that Negro recognized it now. It's great, dog.
And that's why I picked 3 classics. So it wouldn't be, it's like you said, it's like the Jay-Z question. If I gave him Blueprint, Reasonable Doubt, American Gangster, or the Black Album, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's the fun part of it. But thinking about how you think about it, I thought you were going to put King first and Tupac second. But your analysis and the humility with which you offered actually, I think, makes a lot of sense. And all the books stand tall for me. In this most recent book, Long Time Coming, Reckoning with Race in America is another important contribution, not just to your body of work, but to the American and really global conversation on race, man. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for writing this wonderful book. People want to get a hold of you. How can they find you on social media?
Yeah, so on Twitter, I'm Michael E. Dyson, at Michael E. Dyson. Everything else, Facebook, and you can tell somebody else set it up. I don't know why they didn't put Michael Eric Dyson on the darn Twitter, but that's what they did. On Facebook and on Instagram is at Michael Eric Dyson.
Oh man, so y'all can find him at Michael Eric Dyson in those places, Michael E. Dyson on Twitter. And again, the book is called Long Time Coming, Reckoning with Race in America. It is available everywhere that books are sold. Make sure you check it out. Thank y'all. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to Coffee and Books. Make sure to follow us on Instagram with the handle Coffee and Books Show. That's Coffee, A-N-D, Books Show. Also, you can buy all the books that I've been discussing here at bookshop.org/shop/Uncle Bobby's, or you can go straight to UncleBobby's.com. That's Uncle, BOBBIES.com.